guys, welcome back to another It's Tadpole MMA UFC card prediction. We've got UFC 258 this weekend, Kamaru Usman versus Gilbert Burns. Quickly though, before we get into that, just recapping last week, managed to sneak away with a verdict bronze badge. In terms of the bets, the Chason single was voided as that fight got scratched. We cashed the Volkov single, and then at $6.50 we needed Clay Guida to find a finish, just lost. He almost had that rear naked choke late in the third round. And then as for the multi, we lost it by one leg. We needed Volkov to win in round 4 or 5 or via a decision. And Overeem proved to not be durable enough, which was surprising to me, but impressive nonetheless. My worst call of the night, no call was particularly poor, but probably Fahea. Dariush was just better everywhere. You know, he was the pressure guy, the one that had the volume as well. And then where I thought he might have had a more difficult time implementing the grappling this time round, he just dominated through those first 2 rounds. Diego did make the adjustments late, but it was too late, and it's a great win for Beneil. Really intrigued to see who he draws next. My best call of the night would be Clay Guida, almost a 5 times underdog on verdict. He was just a terrible stylistic matchup for Michael Johnson, which we read. Like I mentioned, we had a single on him to win via finish, real close. Probably would have sent us up into a gold badge or even a belt if he'd locked up that submission late as we were riding that on verdict, but still happy with the win. So yeah, anyway, all in all across the card, 3 wins, 3 losses, 2 wins, 2 losses with underdog picks. So going at 50% across the board, pretty annoying, you know, card cancellations and added bouts. We ended up with Mike Rodriguez and Danilo Marquez on the main card, a fight I'd hardly looked into and didn't really have the time to. You know, I didn't rate Rodriguez highly, but didn't know enough about Marquez late to swing the bat on him as a big underdog, which sucks, you know, because it makes me fall to 50% on the card, which isn't good, you know, and it's what I'm tipping on the year thus far, which is not good. So we need to get things into motion, hopefully starting here with another 6-fight main card on verdict. They added the top of the prelims bout just this morning, so we'll get straight into it. It's Jim Miller versus Bobby Green. Jim Miller 2.67 times on verdict and $3.14 at the bookies. Bobby Green 1.6 times and $1.33. I'm not going to take long on this one at all. At this stage of their careers, the way Bobby's been surging and, you know, looking amazing in his fights, and Jim just less so, I have to play Green. It's the obvious choice. You know, Bobby did lose his last fight to Thiago Moises, but that was a really close fight. He completely dominated in terms of significant strikes and was pretty unlucky to lose. I did score at 29-28 in his favour. You know, I think he's just going to have a field day with the striking in this fight. He's a volume guy. He's going to kick the legs and work the body, get very loose with the hands. You know, he's technically sound with his striking and defensively reliable as well. He does go the hands down approach a lot, which can be a little unnerving when you're playing him. But his footwork and overall head movement is at an elite level, and he rarely gets tagged, let alone tagged well. I think he's going to be able to manage distance and just light Miller up. He's also a great grappler. You know, it goes without saying that Miller has the more dangerous jits, but that is his sole win condition, in my opinion. I don't think he has the power or the striking prowess to knock Bobby out, nor kind of the volume to edge a decision. He relies on a submission, you know, each of his last 4 wins being in that fashion. But Bobby, a very capable wrestler, capable offensively, manages to stay safe from submission attempts as well. You know, he hasn't been subbed in 12 years. And across that time span, he's actually had 25 professional fights. So, yeah. And although he is strong defensively, with the takedowns, 72%, something around there, he could definitely get taken down. You know, Jim is a crafty veteran. But even so, Green's the bigger guy. He has good defense from his back as well. I think he can survive and create space to stand up. So I'm taking Bobby Green via a decision at 2.2 times, along with 45% of verdict users as of right now. Pretty short odds, but extremely likely outcome in my opinion. And 45% of other people think that as well. Next fight along, we've got Julian Marquez versus Maki Patola. Marquez, got that wrong, 1.64 times and $1.51. He's definitely the favourite on verdict. Let me just check. Yeah, so Julian Marquez 1.64 times and $1.51. Maki Patola coming back at 2.55 times and $2.44. This fight, although it's starting the main card, it's not essentially name value. Dana's doing it for a reason. It's going to be a barn burner, absolute fireworks. These guys swing hard as hell. And as for predicting, if this wasn't Marquez's first fight since July of 2018, he would be an absolute lock at these odds. But it's a really, really long layoff, and Patola fought 3 times in 2020. Results didn't really go his way, 1 win and 2 losses, but that octagon time is there for him. Like I've already mentioned, both of these guys really exciting fighters to watch. Predominantly strikers, big power punchers who prefer to utilize their hands. Neither guy kicks to the legs, but both will kick to the body and the head a lot. I'd say Marquez probably kicks a little more. And yeah, both guys dynamite in their hands, but I would say Julian's shots take greater effect. Although in this matchup he has a marginally shorter reach, he is the far larger man, a true middleweight, a big middleweight in fact, whereas Maki is smaller. It's been talked about that he could probably make 170 with a structured cut, which, he would be a big welterweight. But as for wrestling, Patola does hit takedowns and he does actually shoot pretty frequently. He would seem to have an advantage with regards to initiating the grappling as well. We haven't actually seen Marquez complete a takedown in the UFC yet, but I think Julian's the better grappler, and I think he's the more dangerous grappler too. He has been taken down plenty and his takedown defense isn't great, but man, he's good on the canvas. He rarely gets controlled. He's incredibly slippery and throws up submission attempts at a ridiculous rate. He's attempted 5 subs through his first 2 UFC fights, plus 1 more in his Contender Series bout. And he chases those attempts hard, and if he doesn't complete it, he always ensures it results in a reversal or him getting back to his feet. So he's wise with it. All right, how I expect this one to play out on the feet is Marquez being the pressure guy and being onto Maki. We saw Patola let Darren Stewart and even let Impa Kasanganay take the space up in front of him in those fights. But in those fights, Maki still managed to circle out and evade. Julian's far, far better at cutting those angles, and I think he's going to manage to trap him, and we're going to see some big brawling exchanges, in a phone booth throwing heavy leather, and someone's probably going to fall. And if I'm tipping who that's going to be, I think it's going to be Patola. I've already said that I think Julian hits harder, and then in terms of durability, he also edges that. He's never been finished. He traded with the heavy-handed Darren Stewart in an absolute brawl and took all of his shots, whereas Maki's been knocked out twice, got hurt by Darren Stewart as well, in the pocket before being choked out. I think that Marquez finishes this fight in the first round. It could be a knockout, it could be a submission, but with the value on the submission prop, the fact that Patola has been sub 3 times in his career and is likely going to enforce the grappling exchanges at some point in this fight, along with Julian's aggressiveness chasing subs, I'm going to take the value there, and I'm going Marquez round 1 submission at 29.02 times. Very favourable odds, I think. I think there's definitely an edge there. Only 3% of verdict users currently on the outcome, and I think its likelihood definitely serves value at the price. So yeah, I like it. Next fight along, Pedro Munhoz versus Jimmy Rivera. Pedro Munhoz, the favourite on verdict, 1.53 times, but a slight underdog at the bookies, $2.15. Jimmy Rivera, 2.87 times on verdict and $1.67 at the bookies. This is actually going to be the second meeting between these two guys. They first fought in 2015, a fight in which Rivera won by split decision. It was a close fight. I scored it for Jimmy, but Pedro showed some real toughness. He was kind of getting touched up in the first round, and he managed to fight back and make it a close one. As for their careers since, their trajectories, Rivera went straight to fighting guys a little higher in the division, whilst Pedro managed to rack up a few more wins in the lower leagues before making his ascension. Now though, both guys really similarly positioned in the division and kind of similarly experienced as well with regards to who they've fought, a couple of common opponents. As for recent results, Munhoz has now actually lost his last 2 fights. The first one to Aljamain Sterling and then Frankie Edgar. Frankie fight was extremely close though, so I know a lot of people scored that for Pedro. As for Jimmy, he won his last fight against Cody Stamen at featherweight, but had lost his previous two, again, to Aljamain Sterling and then to Petr Yan. So, both have really been fighting guys at the top of this 135 mound for a little while now. As for their skill sets, Rivera is the better striker, in my opinion. He has really clean boxing, a solid 68-inch reach for his height, which helps him let his hands fly whilst managing distance quite well. It also helps his defense. His defense is better than Pedro's. He circles and slips very, very neatly. Munhoz doesn't really move his head that well and is extremely susceptible to getting touched up. His last two fights were wars, but his opponents have each landed 135 plus strikes on him in those fights, and 70% of them were to the head. Rivera's the fastest striker of the two as well. The advantages for Pedro would probably lie in the kicking department. Jimmy does kick, but not as much as Munhoz. Pedro's leg kicks are a staple of his game. And then the power too, the great equalizer. Munhoz would have to edge the raw one-shot power in this matchup as well. To speak to durability now, Pedro's never been finished in his career, whilst Rivera has been knocked out once, which was a fight against Marlon Moraes, when Marlon was on the come-up and just finishing a bunch of dudes to get that title shot. Rivera's only been knocked down in one other fight though, which was his fight against the champ Petr Yan. He did get knocked down twice, but crazily enough, he was on his way to beat Petr Yan without those knockdowns. He got sat down at the end of the first and at the end of the second round for Petr to steal those rounds. Jimmy Rivera won the third. Without those knockdowns, the layout of this division might be much different, but anyway, I digress. As to their wrestling chops, both guys kind of extremely strong in that department, but both guys also prefer to strike, and although we likely do see some takedown attempts in this fight, I struggle to see it hitting the floor, as both guys really strong defensively. Rivera 92% takedown defense, Munhoz 80%, so in a pure stand-up affair, like this one likely will be, give me Jimmy Rivera, man. I think Pedro's too hittable. Jimmy's going to stick his combinations and move, fight the outside to try and evade those leg kicks, evade that power of Pedro, and just keep Munhoz chasing him. Munhoz does have volume, but it's not in a high motion fight like that. It's through wild exchanges where he stands toe-to-toe with his opponent and they just tee off. Rivera should not play that game, and he should win here as a result. As for a method, I did want to play the TKO. Rivera has good angles, great hands like I've already talked about, and he could definitely land something on Pedro, especially with Munhoz coming off two fights where he's taken a ton of damage. He could accumulate, but Rivera's only scored one knockout in the UFC. Munhoz never been finished. I'm already taking someone later on this card to lose via finish when they have never been stopped before, so I can't get too crazy on the whole card. So I'm going to take Jimmy Rivera to win a decision at 4 times, along with 25% of other verdict users. Very reasonable odds considering its likelihood, in my opinion. So that's a good play. Next fight along, Kelvin Gastelum versus Ian Heinisch. Kelvin Gastelum 1.27 times and $1.42. Ian Heinisch 4.68 times and $2.73. Props to the UFC. This is good matchmaking here. Gastelum on a 3-fight skid, seemingly needing to earn his spot back in this division's elite, whilst pardon me, Heinisch had that impressive round 1 knockout over Meerschaert in his last fight. This kind of helped him catch a pretty big name in a spotlight spot here on a pay-per-view. As for their skill sets, both guys pretty well rounded. Gastelum has a power advantage in my opinion. I think their volume's pretty equal. Heinisch will kick a little more though. We saw that in his last fight, his first bout since moving to Tiger Muay Thai. He utilised that Muay Thai base much more as a result. Both guys throw that low calf kick. It's good to see. It's incredibly effective. We all know that. As for defense, Gastelum has that box covered. His head movement is far better. His slips and evasiveness are better too, which also makes him the better counter striker. Although both of these guys like to be the one coming forward and pressuring in order to kind of set up their blitzes and flurries, I much prefer Kelvin's ability to evade plus land his own shots on the back foot. Now, both guys also do boast wrestling chops. It's no secret that Heinisch probably goes to that well a little bit more, and he also has the better top pressure. Gastelum, very capable takedowns, but he leaves a lot to be desired with his top pressure. He struggles to keep guys grounded. And I don't think he's going to be able to out-wrestle Heinisch, who is incredibly slippery on the mat, and is likely going to get right back to his feet if he does get taken down. Nevertheless, I like that both of these guys use level changes. It mixes it up, shows another angle. One thing about Heinisch's wrestling and his takedowns in particular is that he doesn't complete them very well. He's kind of opposite to Gastelum in that way. His takedowns aren't great where Kelvin's are, but his top pressure is great where Gastelum is not. Lots of Ian's takedown attempts end up as kind of clinch scenarios against the cage, and Kelvin's very strong there, very well skilled. He looks for the over-under, peels his back off the cage, goes towards the underhook, and reverse. He got the better of Darren Till in the clinch game in their fight, and Darren's a big, strong guy who is very dominant through the clinch usually, which is also a big factor here, the size. Kelvin is notoriously undersized for middleweight. His power remains and his chin is hung tough against these bigger dudes, but he is always the smaller frame and dimensionally at a disadvantage, which is less of the case here. Heinisch is obviously still going to be the thicker guy. He's the more natural middleweight, but the height and reach is finally somewhere near level for Kelvin, which he is going to relish, as well as the actual styles. Two of Gastelum's 3 losses on this skid came to Adesanya and Till. Outside fighters, great kickboxers, way longer than him. Plus, both of those guys manage distance well, are technically superb, and have good enough movement that they manage to keep Kelvin out of the pocket and just chasing them on their bike. That won't be the case here. Like I've already mentioned, Heinisch is not that great defensively. So when Kelvin comes forward, he's going to be able to find him with that jab and with that power left. Then, instead of him having to chase the whole fight and be the one closing distance, Heinisch is also going to have to come forward to engage at times, where I think Kelvin has the potential to draw him into a big counter shot. He's got the better counter shot ability, better defense, and that reads into that. Overall, this is a close fight, but I think it's the perfect one to bring that killer back out of Kelvin, the one we saw go a tough 5 against Adesanya, which is ridiculous, by the way, because that was arguably 2-2, and Adesanya just poured it on him in the 5th, and Kelvin survived, but didn't have it to go with him, Anyway, I like Gastelum and I like him by knockout. I'm not a massive fan of the odds on verdict. It's just over 2 times. I don't think it represents the true plausibility of this eventuating. Heinisch has never been finished to strikes, but he's very hittable. These styles match up perfectly for Gastelum to let his hands go, and as long as he can keep Ian shooting the same old average takedowns and peel himself off the cage, I think he should win within the distance. So Gastelum, first round knockout at 2.35 times. 43% of users are also going with the Gastelum knockout, so it is the majority vote. As for playing the first round, there's not much to it. Ian starts fast. Kelvin will likely be a touch more patient, but 8 of his 13 wins via finish have been in the opening round. That also includes his exhibition bouts on The Ultimate Fighter, but just a bit of stats there, or a bit of data to kind of support the first round play, even though not much is going into that. Alright, co-main, Macie Barber versus Alexa Grasso. Macie Barber, the favourite on verdict, 1.66 times and $2.20 at the bookies. Alexa Grasso, 2.52 times on verdict and $1.64 at the bookies. For me, this is the toughest fight of the card to call. It really is a pick 'em, lots of skills to consider and some X factors as well that come into play. Essentially though, both of these girls like to strike. Grasso, I think she has the better technical boxing, but Barber definitely has the power advantage, plus the raw volume and aggression advantage as well. Grasso has a terrible habit of kind of warming up through fights and starting a little sluggish, a little off, only throwing one at a time, not really hitting her rhythm until the second frame. And that's going to be a big problem if she does that against Macie, who traditionally starts pretty high on pressure, pretty high on aggression, So that's could definitely lead to a first round knockout for Macie. As for defense, neither of these women have read the handbook on head movement. I'm unsure they even know where to start with that. Both incredibly hittable, especially off of their kicks. Both girls kick and leave themselves wide open to the straight counters. Now, even though both of them share this trait, the styles means it favours Grasso. Without a noticeable size or reach discrepancy, the fighter who throws the straighter strikes will have the advantage over someone who wings their shots when they're competing against someone who doesn't get their head off the centre line. That's a tick to Alexa. Furthermore, although the head movement isn't there, Grasso's overall footwork and evasiveness is better. Macie doesn't really have a back foot game. She's a pretty poor counter striker and is a defensive liability on the back foot. Evident most in the JJ Aldrich fight, who when she was getting her going backwards, she was piecing her up. She got kind of stumbled in that fight, even though the UFC stats haven't credited a knockdown. Grasso's good at moving backwards, good at sliding out of the way with lateral movement. Macie is not. Alright, some quick points on the grappling. Both of these fighters have shown tendencies to get controlled on the mat. Takedown defense has been a weakness of Grasso's, and Barber got smashed on the mat against Modafferi in her last fight. Yes, Barber did her ACO in that fight, but she still got worked in the grappling through the first round when her knee was fine. She suffered that injury at the start of the second. As for offensive grappling, I'd say Barber would have an advantage. She's the bigger, stronger girl, has that bullish style and does relish a clinch fight. But will Barber be able to implement her offensive clinch work and wrestling against Grasso? I'm not sure, because although Alexa's takedown defense isn't great, only really great wrestlers have been able to control her on the canvas, Only two fighters really, Tatiana Suarez and Carla Esparza, two of the best female wrestlers in the UFC. So that gives me reason to believe that Barber may not have it as easy as the stats may suggest on the mat. A little X factor here is the fact that this is Barber's first fight since doing her ACL. But in her favour, she's only missed just over a year. That Modafferi fight was in January on the Cowboy Conor card, so she hasn't actually missed that much time. But the regularity of performances and kind of strength of competition does go to Grasso. She has fought far better girls in her time in the UFC, although they were mostly at 115. With regards to the weight, this is now Grasso's second fight at flyweight. Usually there are some questions when someone changes classes, but she answered those in her last bout against Kim. She looked pretty sharp. She looked very fast. And she also talked in interviews about how the camp and how the cut was so much more comfortable. So yeah, a close fight like this with some of the variables and some of the stylistic differences going in Grasso's favour, I'm going to play her, largely due to the fact that she is the verdict underdog, and I think this is a pick'em. And I'm going to take her via a decision at 3.2 times with 31% of other predictors. Grasso's yet to finish a UFC fight, and Barber's super tough. Torn ACL, cut and bloody in her last fight. She could have let Roxy finish her easily, but she stayed in there, made Modafferi earn it across a full 15 minutes. So hard to see Grasso getting her out of there. As for the kind of discrepancy here, guys, between the verdict odds and the odds at the bookies, this is probably the best example of me playing Grasso on verdict as the 2.52 times underdog, but then on the comeback playing Barber at the bookies at $2.20. I could really listen to any argument going either way, and the value is on the underdog, whether that be verdict or at the bookies, so hence me going with Alexa. Alright, main event time now, Kamaru Usman versus Gilbert Burns. Usman 1.81 times on verdict and $1.31 at the bookies. Gilbert Burns 2.24 times and $3.26 at the bookies. Now this is a fight that I had a serious look at, as I should all of them, but I went in deep with this, and prior to tape, I was in the thinking that stylistically this is probably one of the more challenging matchups for the champion of this division. Now after tape, I'm still in that thinking. I think Gilbert Burns has a very refined and dangerous skill set. He has world championship level BJJ, and then he has some very neat striking too. It's come along in leaps and bounds, and he's got power, But this is Kamaru Usman we're talking about. He is so dominant, and he really is at the top of his game with what he does. If you're in the belief that Burns has the better striking, plus you think he has the more dangerous ground game and better jits, I would agree with you. But it's that time in the middle of those two positions where Usman takes his fights and where he really dominates fights. Watching his previous bouts just really emphasised that to me. He spends minimal time at distance. Gilbert's going to have a striking advantage with versatility, with technique, but Usman just doesn't let time pass like that. He also spends minimal time in scrambles on the ground, which is where Gilbert would have an advantage as well, trying to kind of lock up a submission or create space and escape control when they're moving around. Where Usman spends all the time in his fights is in the clinch, controlling his opponent up against the cage, minutes on end, burying them into the fence and staying busy, not necessarily landing significant strikes, but doing all that weird shit, stomping the feet, hooking and kneeing the body, punching or kneeing the thighs, really driving his head up into the chin of his opponent. And then, in such a cerebral manner, he'll change pace from this clinch game that you've kind of gotten comfortable defending and then just sweep you, put you on your back, end up deep in your guard or already off to the side, even in mount, which then inhibits those scramble scenarios as he already has you exactly where he wants in his best position to kind of flatten you out and control you. At the starts of rounds or on the breaks off the cage, Burns will have problems for Usman for sure. The leg kicks will be there. Both RDA and Masvidal went to those a bunch whenever they had space, but do I think Burns can knock Usman out? I don't. Kamaru's chin is great. He has been cracked before and eaten it like nothing. I will be surprised if Burns lays him out. And then do I think Burns can submit Usman? It's possible, but it would have to be, in transition off of his back. I can't see him taking Kamaru down. 100% takedown defense from 12 UFC fights. And like I've already highlighted, usually when Kamaru makes that decision to actually transition from the clinch to a takedown, he's already ensured his safety in that next position by being in a dominant spot. His grappling IQ is as good as it comes. Plus, he is wise to the submission threat. We've seen that before. He defended the Kimura from RDA with all the correct techniques. He's not a slouch with his jiu-jitsu defense. Burns' most likely way of securing a win via submission is, managing to kind of slip the clinch at some point and kind of backpack Kamaru for the rear naked, which is in fact the only way Usman has lost in his career, a backpack rear naked choke. But it's just so hard to visualize that happening. It's hard to see Burns, winning many, if any, of the clinch battles. Even Tyron Woodley had Burns controlled in the clinch for a few minutes in the championship rounds of their fight. And then if you're talking the other method for Gilbert, Gilbert winning a decision, Usman's style is simply tailor-made for grinding those out. Burns would have to avoid the clinch fight if he's to take this on the scorecards, which just seems an impossible feat because Usman makes the cage so small. He's the larger man, the much stronger man. Gilbert Burns has definitely grown into welterweight, but he is still nowhere near the size of Usman. As for a bit of an interchangeable, a bit of X factor here, I don't usually read into these things too much, but I do feel that both of these guys being previous training partners favours Burns more than it does Kamaru. He's felt that strength and that size on the inside before, which I imagine would come as quite a shock to guys who hadn't tangled with him before. And, Burns would have practiced working his own offense from the clinch, plus looking for submissions in those spots or on the way to the canvas. Another thing that squares these guys up a little more as well is the conditioning box that Burns well and truly ticked in his last fight against Woodley. His first 5-rounder, and he went hard for the full 25. But, Usman's fought into a 5th round in each of his last 5 fights, and he's not going to be beaten in the cardio department. So although those last 2 points kind of level it up marginally, it's just got to be Usman for me. And I'll have a decision at 2.29 times. 44% of other verdict users have gone with that. Again, the popular vote. It probably won't play out as cut and dry as this, which I'm all for. At the end of the day, I am just a fan, and I love seeing crazy moments in fights and upsets as much as the next person. But this is the sensible play for good reason and for many of the reasons I went over. So that's that. Quickly, guys, slide to the bets of this week. We'll kick it off with the multi. I'm taking Julian Marquez via a finish, whether that be knockout or submission. I'm taking Jimmy Rivera money line, and I'm taking Kelvin Gastelum by a knockout. at $24.04 over on Sportsbet. Obviously, the riskiest leg of those would be the Gastelum knockout. I'm pretty confident Marquez will find a finish in their bout. I'm pretty confident Jimmy Rivera is going to do enough to outpoint Pedro Munhoz. But, you know, Ian Heinisch has never been finished. He's a durable customer. But I feel like it's a great matchup for Gastelum to show us he's still here and still capable of winning fights via finish. So I like the play. To the singles now. Last week, one of our moderate favourites got scratched in Chasson, but the one other moderate favourite that stood was Alexander Volkov, which we cashed. So I'm going to continue with this method of choosing a couple of moderate favourites straight up that hopefully see us improve this record. First of them all is going to be Julian Marquez moneyline. The best value I could find was over on Ladbrokes. I got $1.60, so a unit on him. Throwing out as well, I'm also taking the Marquez finish at $2.40, single play, over on Sportsbet. And then another moderate favourite that I'm taking is Jimmy Rivera, again over on Ladbrokes. $1.68 for him is the best price currently. And then my wide odds that I'm going to try and make a bit of a buck on is Kelvin Gastelum via knockout at $6 on Sportsbet. Like I've already talked about, it's the risky one, but I think there's value there. I think there's a bit of an edge. He's only $2, really short to win by a decision. Knockout is the play if you're going to play any on Gastelum's side, that is. Alright, thanks for sticking around this long. If you have done, drop a like, drop a comment, tell me who you're predicting this week and your bets. I'm willing to listen to anybody. And yeah, if you haven't subscribed already, subscribe to the channel. It helps out a lot. Looking to grow the channel over the course of this year. And yeah, I'll catch you guys again next week for another video. Catch up.